Welcome to our InFocus session. This time our area of focus is going to be disease prevention and treatment. All our sessions are recorded and available on YouTube, and we hope you will use them with your clubs and community afterwards. We're delighted that Rotary Great Britain and Ireland now has a new partnership with Bipolar UK. And working together, we hope to help people with bipolar, their families and their friends. So this evening, our talk is about staying well with bipolar. And we are so lucky to have 3 speakers this evening who bring expertise and experience. We have Professor Guy Goodwin, who is a leading expert in bipolar research. We have Simon Kitchen, who is the CEO of Bipolar UK, and we have Leah Milner, an award-winning journalist who will speak from a personal perspective. So I would like to ask our 3 speakers if they would come on, and if you would like to ask questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will try and answer as many as possible afterwards. So welcome, Guy, Simon and Leah.
Hi.
Thanks, Cheryl, for the very warm introduction. Guy, I think you're going to be giving us, starting off, aren't you, by telling just people about what bipolar is and some of the treatments available for people, and then we're going to hear from Leah, who's going to give a kind of first-hand personal testimony about what it's like to live with bipolar, and then I'm going to finish off by just talking about what the amazing things that that Rotarians across GB and Ireland can do to be able to help people with bipolar to live well. So Guy, it's a great honour to have you on, to be able to as one of the world experts on bipolar, just to tell Rotarians across the country what bipolar is and what are the treatments for it.
Thanks, Simon. Well, really, bipolar disorder is a disorder of mood, by which I mean that it's characterized by times when people have very high moods, when they may be manic, in the old terminology, or they may be depressed. We're all fairly familiar with the idea of being happy and being sad, but mania and depression are really very much more than that. They're more intense, and the person who's experiencing these episodes is much less able to control them. Now, this pattern of alternating, or at least frequent episodes where one's mood goes very high or very low, really start very frequently in the decade between 15 and 25. So it often starts young, and it's difficult to understand what's happening when it first starts. So it's very common for there to be delays, and we're concerned that those delays are quite serious. About 1 million people have the more severe form of bipolar disorder, where the mania becomes really quite disorientating, and people may have to go into hospital. And then there's a lot of other people, probably there's an equal number at least, who have a less severe form from the mania point of view, but the main problem is the depression. So these episodes may be quite frequent, they may be quite infrequent. There's a lot of variability. It's not just one thing, but it can be very disruptive of people's lives and of the lives of families, because when people are manic, they tend to make quite bad judgments about that are not really in their interests, and pretty important things can happen to them that are destructive of their position, either at work or in social life or in their relationships. So mania is extremely destructive. Manic episodes can last for quite a long time, so months, and the treatment is really relatively straightforward where people come forward to receive it. Depression is more difficult, and it's often a little longer lasting, and people may struggle with that in their life in a way that's very difficult for them. Depression is a more familiar concept, so I expect most of you to kind of know what I'm talking about, but it's the case where people feel sad, they're unable to see a future, they lose interest in things, they withdraw socially, and of course the sad risk is that in those states at the worst, then the risk of suicide. And bipolar disorder, unfortunately, is a very important risk factor for people to complete suicide. Now, all of this sounds difficult, and it is a challenge for people to get an understanding of their condition and live through it, which is what Leah is going to talk about. But it's a condition which has an upside in that there are reasonably well evidenced treatments and reasonably well evidenced changes in lifestyle that people can make, which make it less likely for them to have these episodes. Because the big issue is, can you prevent these episodes occurring frequently? If your life is continually being interrupted by either mania or depression, it's very hard to get a normal swing and pattern to your life. So the big challenge medically, psychologically, is to get people into a state where they're less vulnerable to these episodes. And that usually involves medication, not always. And it also involves making adjustments and being more aware of what triggers exist for becoming ill and modifying one's lifestyle accordingly. So I think in a nutshell, that's the way I see bipolar disorder. It's a little, that's the way I've described it, as a little dehumanized. So it's pretty key that you get a first-hand version. But I, as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, see it in those terms. And obviously my mission is to try and improve the treatment. So thanks, Simon. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Guy. That's a really good overview as a clinician of what bipolar is and how you can support someone with it, and the importance of medication. Leah, what's it like living with bipolar?
Thanks, Simon. So, yeah, well, to give you a bit of backdrop to my story, I was diagnosed with bipolar almost a decade ago when I was in my early 30s, and I'd experienced depressive episodes before, as well as periods where my mood was elevated, that I can now recognize as what's called hypomania, but it wasn't obvious at the time that it was anything other than, normal mood swings, let's say. It wasn't until I was sectioned in January 2014 during an episode of psychosis that I was able to get a formal diagnosis, which meant I had access to the treatment that I needed. And by this point, the condition had already had a really damaging impact on my career, relationships, and finances, although I've been really fortunate in being able to bounce back from that. So to take you back to that time, in the 6 months running up to my hospital admission, I'd become severely depressed. I had a really demanding job working for a national newspaper, and I was also having difficulties in my relationship. So between home and the office, there was no respite. My confidence and sense of self kind of collapsed, and I sort of sank lower and lower until I was having to go to my GP and basically begging for antidepressants or something to change my mood. After a couple of months on medication, my mood did start to lift, but it just kept on going upwards and upwards. So if doctors had known back then that it was bipolar, they would have prescribed what's called a mood stabilizer alongside the antidepressants, which would have prevented my mood from escalating. But the issue is that at that point, I'd only presented with depressive symptoms, so they didn't realize it was bipolar. Around Christmas time, I'd started to believe that I was better and that I didn't need the medication anymore. And in early January, I stopped taking the antidepressants really suddenly. No one had warned me of the risks of stopping abruptly. And from there, my mood became really chaotic. I was chatting to strangers in the street, and I was coming up with all sorts of endless projects and ideas. I was really, really active on social media, on Twitter, Facebook. I felt euphoric, overconfident and powerful. And it was like the complete flip side of all the feelings of worthlessness and low self-esteem that I've been experiencing in the months before. So it felt like a welcome relief. And I wanted to use my energy for good. I felt that if I started some kind of movement on Twitter, people would get behind me and it would become massive. So there's this heightened sense of confidence. I began campaigning against payday lenders, and I was tweeting MPs, starting new hashtags, and I was convinced all of this was going to snowball. Alongside this, I was having lots of ideas for creative and art projects. I was buying loads of random items in charity shops, spending a lot of money, everything from top hats to shoes that didn't even fit me. I started scribbling messages in books, and I was leaving them places or giving them to people and asking them to pass them on. I thought I was passing on messages that were going to be carried around. I remember leaving stacks of books outside my flat with notes scribbled inside, and I thought that my messages were going to be carried up and down the country. I even imagined that when I opened my front door, there'd be crowds of people who'd picked up my messages and joined my movement. So understandably, my family started to realise something was seriously wrong and became concerned. And they encouraged me to go to my GP. And my GP then signed me off for work for a month. But despite realising that there was this elevated mood, there was no referral to a specialist or mention that it could possibly be bipolar. On leaving the GP surgery, I got completely lost, even though I was in an area that I've known my whole life. I befriended a homeless man who helped me all the way back to my flat in Camden, where I was living, renting with my boyfriend at the time. And then on my way back home, I made friends with more and more people who I met, all homeless people who I was offering money and promising shelter in the block where I lived. When my boyfriend came back from work, he found me on the doorstep, giving away all our belongings to the new friends that I'd made. He called my mum, who managed to drive me to A&E despite the fact I was pulling the handbrake on and trying to jump out of the car at every traffic light. And then we were waiting for about 12 hours in A&E, at which point I was then finally sectioned. Then I was in hospital for about 2 weeks. I was given strong antipsychotics, and gradually that took my mood down and I became calmer. After 2 weeks, I was discharged. But it took me several months to gradually come down from this sort of high of elevated mood. Unfortunately, from there, I then crashed into a really abysmal suicidal depression. It really felt like being alive was torture, and I'd go to sleep every night while wishing that I just wouldn't wake up, because I just didn't want to go on. I was off work for the next 8 months, and I was really lucky because I was able to access care through an NHS day unit, which I attended every single day. But I was still being chased by my employer for doctor's notes to justify my absence, and there wasn't really much of an understanding of what it means to go through something like this, or what it feels like to have to try and come back from it. The thought of going back to such an intense environment was actually preventing me from getting better. I couldn't really see a way that could ever be a part of my life again. So reluctantly, I resigned. But it did turn out to be a good thing for my recovery, and I was able to rebuild my career, starting back as a freelancer. With medication, therapy, and lots of self-management techniques, I'm now able to manage the condition. But if I hadn't had the diagnosis, none of that would have been possible. I wouldn't have been able to access that care. I'm not even sure that I'd still be alive today, and I'm certain that I would have done irreparable damage to many aspects of my life. As it is, I've worked out that the period of illness, which panned out over the course of a year, cost me around £25,000 in lost earnings and overspending. And it could have been a lot worse if I'd been able to, say, take out loans or credit cards. I was able to move in with my mum and live rent-free during that recovery period when I had practically no income. And without that safety net, I can see how I could easily have been made homeless. That's why I think diagnosis is so crucial to preventing suicide and helping people with bipolar to protect themselves from all the potentially devastating consequences that the condition has. So I'll pass back to Simon now, who's going to tell you a bit more about the charity's work.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing your story, and I think it's a really powerful illustration of how you can, it's like what it's like to go through a really terrifying manic episode, and just the way that it kind of escalated and how helpless people around you felt, but how, and also fundamentally how you've rebuilt your life and recovered. And I always think when I meet people with bipolar, it's kind of ordinary people who have had really extraordinary experiences. And I think you'd be walking around, there's over 1 million people with bipolar in the UK, and probably a good proportion of them, more than half, have had really horrendous experiences like that, but they've rebuilt their lives and they're doing really amazing things now. And what we want to do as part of the charity, and why we're working with Rotary, is to make your experience, Leah, the second part of it, the way you've been able to rebuild your life, is the norm for people living with bipolar, and ideally to be able to have prevented what happened to you early on as well. And if you could have lived your life without having to go through that, then obviously you would have done, and it was an awful experience. So there's so much that we can do to all work together to stop those experiences from happening. So we've got a plan. We've got a really exciting partnership with Rotary, because it's a really fantastic link up between Bipolar UK and Rotarians, because we've got a very similar philosophy on life, which is about bringing people together to do good in their community. And it's we're a national network of people affected by bipolar, to people living with it and their friends and family, in the same way that Rotary is a national network that brings together people who want to be able to improve the lives of those in their community. So it's a really fantastic connection. And we've got a plan that we're putting in place, working with Cheryl, to be able to focus on two real areas. So firstly, it's going to be around diagnosis. So we think there's a massive role to be playing to be able to mobilize Rotarians, as tens of thousands of Rotarians across the UK and Ireland, to be able to raise awareness of what bipolar is and those are the symptoms that we just talked about there, and to be able to use you as a catalyst in your communities to be able to go out and have conversations, but then also to be able to use that kind of community engagement experience that you've got to be able to have really good conversations with people, using a lot of our resources. We've got a fantastic mood scale that we use, which is a really simple way of being able to talk about the different moods of people with bipolar experience. We're not expecting any Rotarians to be clinicians. We would never expect that. You cannot diagnose people. We cannot diagnose people as a charity. It's only psychiatrists like Guy that can do that. But what we can certainly do is help you have conversations about the symptoms of bipolar, and then to be able to encourage people to be able to have some tools to collect some of those symptoms in our app, and using the mood scale to be able to then present it to GPs so they can then get themselves referred on to be able to get a diagnosis. So we're signing up organisations at the moment, local Rotary. So it's World Bipolar Day on the 30th of March. So we've got just over 3 months, and we're trying to sign up as many Rotaries as possible to be able to work with us to do street stalls and in big events on that week, so that we can get the message out there about what bipolar is and how you can support people to live well. So that's fantastic. So if you're watching this now and you're interested, get in touch with Cheryl, or certainly get in touch with us at Bipolar UK. I think we've even got our own email address for yourselves, so rotary@bipolaruk.org. Also, we provide peer support. So as Leah and Guy said, living with bipolar it is possible to live well with bipolar. If you had to choose a group in society that have had a really rough time, that can do amazing things, and they just need a little bit of support to be able to live well, and to be able to go from being people who are using the NHS to actually a lot of people working in it, delivering services and so forth, and being net taxpayers, like really kind of getting a boost to the economy into the local community. I don't think you could actually find a group in society like people living with bipolar that you could really have a really profound impact on, to transform the lives of. To live well with bipolar requires quite difficult lifestyle changes. It's a really unfair condition. So as Guy said, medication is a really important part of it. So lithium, I think one of the questions coming out is about the effectiveness of lithium, and Guy might want to answer that because he's the doctor. But certainly medication plays a key part, but then effective self-management, which is around prioritizing sleep. People never ever talk about sleep enough. Sleep is probably the most important protective factor for anyone to protect their mental health, but particularly people living with bipolar. And it's probably one of the most profound symptoms as well that people experience. In terms of if you have a loved one who you're concerned about in terms of whether they might have bipolar or not, if they're not sleeping and they've got lots of high energy and they might not sleep for 2 or 3 days, that's probably the most distinctive symptom that they might have that they've got bipolar. So sleep's really important. Managing stress, and stress can be good stress, not trying to put too much on yourself and have too much going on in your life. So we always encourage people with bipolar to be able to be able to plan their lives in a very structured way. So don't go on holiday and start a new job or get married all at the same time, which is what I did when I started my job at Bipolar UK. Like, try to plan your life in a very considered way that allows you to make really good proactive changes in your life, and in your life, like having a family, starting a new job, but do it in a way that's phased, so you're not doing too much at once, and just try to reduce that mental load that you might be carrying. So that's really important. And then also just being able to manage anything around physical and physical health. So like regular exercise helps, minimizing alcohol consumption is important, and so forth. Now, making those changes are often quite counterintuitive to the way that we live our lives in modern society. So having a group of people around you that allows you to make those changes together, people who have been living with bipolar themselves, got close family members, who understand you is so, so important. So that's why we run peer support groups. So it's a similar model to what Alcoholics Anonymous do for people who are alcoholic, who want to recover. We provide the same type of service for people living with bipolar. So it means bringing people together on a monthly basis to be able to talk about what it's like living with bipolar, how to manage a condition and support each other to live well with it. So we've got over 60 groups now across GB and Ireland. We want to get, hopefully with yourselves, we've got a plan, we want to increase that by 20% over the next year. And if we can work well together with yourselves, and we'd love to work with you over the longer term, we'd love to be able to build a partnership that allows us to get up to over 400 groups and get a community, get a group in every single community in the country. So those groups, they cost about £10,000 to set up and about £5,000 to run on an annual basis. So we'd really love to be able to work with you. If you're a group that likes fundraising as well as raising awareness, then we'd really love to hear from you as well. So we're providing lots of services over Christmas. So if you haven't chosen your Christmas charity yet, do bear us in mind. I'm sure most of you have already done so, but some of you might not. You never know. Shy Ben's getting out, as we say over Newcastle. But if you would like to be able to work with us and sign up to work with Cheryl and her cluster champions as well that she's recruited, we'd really love to hear from you so that you could perhaps work proactively with us around World Bipolar Day so that we can get this awareness raising about what bipolar is, but then we could also work in partnership to get a group set up in your local area as well, and to put something in place over the next year. We're here to meet with your local groups as well. So bipolar, I'm sure all of you watching this now will have met 2 or 3 people living with bipolar. You probably haven't realized it. But we would love to be able to come to talk to your groups as well, and to be able to share these experiences that we've just shared with you, and to answer any questions you have, because it's such a massive condition, so many people affected, but it's we talk about it so little that there'll be lots of unanswered questions you'll have. So Cheryl, that's our presentation done now. I think we're just about within the 20 minutes, aren't we? I only went over by 3 minutes, so apologies. Do you want to do a Q&A?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Michael. It's Michael, you're doing it. Bringing you in, Michael, of course.
We've been swapping around, haven't we? Yeah, first of all, Guy, Simon, Leah, thank you very much for those, your presentation, what you've talked about. Certainly I've learned a lot. I'm sure the other people on this session have as well. Before, when people registered, they did pose some questions. And I've got those here, but if I could also say, if you listen to the presentation and you have questions that have occurred in your mind, press the Q&A on the bottom of your screen. That's where it is on a desktop anyway, and you'll be able to type your question in there, and we'll also take those questions as well afterwards. But these are starting with the questions that we have had sent in previously. A couple that are very similar, so I'll ask them together. A gentleman, Brian Davenport, says his granddaughter lives in France and has bipolar. How can I support her? And similar, Sky Summers has said, what is a loving way to support my boyfriend who is bipolar? Who's going to have a go at those?
Go on, Guy. You've got colleagues in France, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly speaking, French psychiatry recognizes bipolar disorder and makes it some sort of priority. There is direct access to psychiatrists, which is a bit easier than in the UK, where you have to be referred. But obviously, it all comes down to the local area and who is available to do the care. I think what I heard was also, how could this person help his granddaughter? And I think basically, it's being understanding and loving, really. It isn't have to be, you don't need to get too technical about it. You don't have to turn yourself into a psychiatrist. It's really quite important that you remain in touch with the person and have the relationship you've always had. And I think it's often very difficult if relatives start kind of acting as the carer. Leah may want to comment about this. It's a very difficult balance to strike between having the relationship you normally have or you would expect to have, and then actually sometimes trying to take responsibility or trying to steer things when you think people are becoming manic, for example. But I'll hand over to Leah. I think Leah will have more interesting things to say than me, actually.
No, I think that's right, Guy. I think it's obviously a really difficult balance for loved ones with not wanting to overstep the mark and kind of be too overbearing, but at the same time, sometimes, you know, there may be points where somebody is posing a risk to themselves where you would step in, but generally I would just take your cue from your granddaughter, or in the other case your partner, and it's just being there. Is there anything I can do to support you? How's it going at the moment? You know, that kind of thing. And just, I think, you know, the person with bipolar hopefully over time will develop quite a keen sense of self-awareness as well. Hopefully that's the way it goes as you kind of develop an understanding of a condition, and you don't want to be constantly feeling like you're being monitored by everybody around you either. You might sometimes want to splash out on an expensive purchase without everybody around you thinking, oh wow, she's manic again. You know, you might sometimes have a brilliant business idea and it might actually be, but you know, it's difficult. You've kind of got to just take your cue from that person and just try and be there, I suppose.
Excellent. Thank you for those. The next one, I'm taking these pretty much in the order they came in. They might be jumble around a little bit. Joanne Portway says she's studying a degree in counselling, particularly for youth mental health. How can we help young people with bipolar get recognised with the ongoing crisis with mental health services?
I think it's just talking about bipolar. I mean, its prevalence is probably going up of bipolar. There's different theories, but if you look at the APMS, which is the best study on this from 2014, 16 to 24-year-olds, they screened about 3.4% to 3.8% screened positive for bipolar, compared to those over 65 was like 0.5. So some of that is going to be, tragically, people with bipolar die on average 10 to 15 years younger, but also that even taking account of that there's obviously a lot more younger people screening positive for it. So we don't quite know why that is. It could be the screening tools themselves that have false positive for young people. But if you look at the number of triggers, we did some research into this. Antidepressants was the second biggest. Sleep and antidepressants were the biggest triggers. And if antidepressant prescribing is going up, then that means that a lot of people are going to be at risk of having more severe episodes of bipolar, certainly. So I think it's being aware of the symptoms of bipolar itself and to make sure that they're considered. A diagnosis is not, it's a tool at the end of the day. So we want to kind of destigmatize it. We don't want people to be near to see kind of saying that they've got bipolar when they haven't got it. But I think it's being aware of the symptoms and then aware of some of the solutions to be able to tackle it. So that those lifestyle changes, as particularly prioritizing sleep, might mean that people don't need to necessarily develop to actually have medication in the end. So, Guy, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, it is quite tricky because you know, the teenage years are probably are times when people have kind of hypomanic experience and they don't all necessarily go on to develop bipolar disorder. So we don't want to over medicalize teenage high spirits. But it's really where things get out of hand and people get into conflict that you need to have a high index of suspicion, as we say. When things, you know, if you get into real conflict over what your enthusiasms, then that's a sort of sign that things are not really in control.
Thank you. Another question, is medication still considered the most effective tool for managing bipolar?
Well, I'm the one who hands it out, so maybe I should pass an opinion. I think certainly for the more severe forms of bipolar 1 disorder, the sort of problems that Leah described, it's probably important that people do get offered the treatment. In the acute phase, it's sometimes not particularly pleasant and people have bad memories of it, and we need to work very hard to do better with that, because sometimes people get put onto very very antipsychotic drugs that are actually they produce quite a lot of adverse effects. So people have bad memories of that, and we should try and minimize that. Really what we're concerned about is the long term, is preventing relapse, and there one has to try and choose medications that are well tolerated so that people are not carrying a side effect burden but actually work. And we have a modest selection of different things that work pretty well. sometimes on their own, sometimes in combination. But medication remains for many people the mainstay of treatment. But as people kind of learn about their illness, then sometimes they can reduce their dependence on medication and really rely much more on the kind of behavioral modifications that that do reduce the risks in the longer term. So it's a balance between the two things, really.
Excellent, thank you. And actually, the next question on my list is, what is your most successful, useful, safe self-management tool?
Go for it, Simon.
Michael, do you want me to answer? Well, I'd like Leah to kind of give her a moment to kind of say what she uses, but certainly we use we've got a moods app that which we've launched, which about 10,000 downloads, so that's totally free to use, and it's based on our mood scale, which is the kind of the most used resource that we produce, which is just a way that people can monitor and keep track of their mood. Like self-awareness is probably the most important tool for self-management. So the app allows you to track their mood, but also what medication they're taking, and to be able to track their sleep as well. And we're hopefully going to enable it so that Fitbit can automate that as well, which might make it a bit easier. But certainly self-awareness, sleep, prioritizing sleep is probably the most important thing in terms of self-management, and it would benefit everyone. If you're not living with bipolar and you think you've got bipolar, you'll certainly not suffer from having 7 to 8 hours sleep as well. Leah.
Yeah, so I don't think I use any particularly formal self-management techniques or tools at the moment. I think I have done a lot over the years since my diagnosis, particularly straight after, in the years afterwards. A lot of group therapy, a lot of peer support, and just kind of a lot of psychoeducation, I think they call it, just sort of really learning and understanding the condition. And now I think it's mainly a case of really being mindful of my diary. Things do get really hectic sometimes, but I know my signs now, and I try and listen to other people as well. If I try and pick up the people around me, if they're raising any concerns, or you can sometimes just sense that from people, that then I will take that on board.
Excellent. You've obviously gone back to your career, and I think Simon's indicated that a lot of people are working. So what is the therapeutic value of work for bipolar people?
I mean, I think it's the same for everyone in the population. Work is a huge, for many people, not for everybody, work is a huge part of your identity, can be, sense of self, sense of feeling like you have a role in the world, feeling useful, feeling productive. And in my job as a journalist, best bit about my job is when we get to help people. And I think that kind of thing, it just, it gives you for me, it's a huge part of what makes me who I am, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of people with bipolar are incredibly proactive. I think that's something that from my experience. So work is really important in terms of the wanting to give back. And also people have missed out on several months and years of their lives, so they kind of want to catch up. So work's obviously a key part of that. People with bipolar pay for a lot of their own care. The NHS is not necessary, unless people get so sick they have to be sectioned. Most care people with bipolar have to pay for themselves. They have to pay for their own prescriptions. Usually they have to then pay for therapy as well. So actually working gives people control, so they can pay for their healthcare, and it gives them stability as well. So I think that's really important to acknowledge. And also people with bipolar achieve really great things. So Eve Conway, one of her comments was about our Christmas appeal, which is Lonely at Christmas. And that's led by Nicky Chin, who from Chin and Chapman, who's a gentleman who's living with bipolar, who wrote the song Lonely at Christmas. And that was about his experience of what it was like going to boarding school as a teenager. And it was that experience that triggered his bipolar. So he's used his work to be able to produce works of art that are now listened to by millions of people across the world. So that's why he was kind enough to donate that to our Christmas appeal. So if you want to share that with any of your local Rotarians and is an example of someone, what the artistic expression of bipolar is, then that would be a really powerful tool. It's a really fantastic song. And I didn't realize it's not actually sung by Elvis Presley. It was someone doing an impression of Elvis Presley. So.
Right. I'm pretty sure you're going to divert this one to Guy, but I might be wrong. I'm currently doing DBT therapy. What psychological treatment is the most suitable for people with bipolar 2 disorder?
Yeah, okay, I'll take that. Yes, dialectical behavior therapy. I think it's the most appropriate is really based on psychoeducation, in fact. Leah referred to this. One has a lot to learn about one's bipolar disorder when one first develops it, and a lot to learn about oneself. And that can be facilitated by, or at least accelerated, should I say, by just knowing more about the commonality of experience, the sort of things I opened the talk, the session with. Just knowing about that is helpful. Just knowing about how it affects people, knowing that you're not alone. All of those things are really very helpful. From that, one goes on to try and make sure that people structure their days in a way that gives them back a sort of social rhythm and also a sleep rhythm, the thing that was being emphasized by Simon earlier. And those sorts of things are quite behavioral. You know, one has the idea that psychological treatments are about, you know, the manifestations of the mind. It isn't really often about that. It's much more about more practical things and learning what has an effect on one's mood, because it often isn't obvious to us. We unconsciously regulate our moods, but when you start to think about it, you can do it better. And that's basically the basis for psychotherapy in this area. DBT isn't really particular about that, but it emphasizes regulation of mood, and that would play into the sort of challenges that patients with bipolar have too.
Thank you. I think Leah's probably gone some way to answering this question already, but I will ask anyway. How do you maintain a career and lasting relationships with this condition? How to overcome fear of failure of these?
I think, I mean, lasting relationships, you need to have people in your life who are understanding, who understand the condition. I think it's very difficult to do that if you're hiding the condition. I understand there's still stigma, of course, but I think, you know, people around you, close to you, need to know in order to be able to maintain those relationships. Career-wise, I know it can be very daunting to admit to having a condition like this in an employment situation, but I would personally, I wouldn't go into a job without disclosing it now. It gives you access to all sorts of support and also protection. If anything, if you were to get into a hypomanic or elated state and do something inappropriate, send an inappropriate email, etc., you've got that protection, that all those legal protections there. If you've disclosed it, your employer has a duty to treat you fairly and not discriminate against you. And I mean, I've found maybe journalism is different to certain other industries, but I found that actually it's probably helped my career rather than hindered it. You know, being able to be open about it has given me the opportunity to write about mental health as well as money, which is my background. And also just, you'd be surprised at how many doors it kind of opens in terms of conversations. There's rarely will I kind of do a presentation and someone not come up to me afterwards and say, oh, you know, I know someone who's going through this, whatever. Quite often in a professional context, you'll have this conversation or make this disclosure, and it opens up a far more human kind of conversation with people than if you'd just been talking purely shop talk and business stuff. So to be honest, I think it's opened more doors than it's closed for me.
Excellent, thank you very much. If there's just one more question, and then I know there's quite a few that have been coming in on the Q&A. Jeremy Clark says, I'm a Bipolar UK trustee, speaking at a local Rotary group in March. How should I pitch my presentation?
with great verve and charisma, Jeremy. I know Jeremy's watching this in the catch up, and he's an excellent presenter. He's been one of our trustees for a large number of years, and he's absolutely amazing. So we're very lucky to have him as a trustee, and I think Rotary is very lucky to have him as well. So, Jeremy, I guess what advice can we give you to do your presentation? Use some of the stats that we talked about today, I guess, and then bring some of your lived experience and talk about some of the extraordinary experience you've had and also what you've managed to achieve as well. He's a civil servant, and he's done loads in the civil service in terms of progressing, like not just obviously bipolar, but he's really kind of like flown the flag for bipolar within the civil service at the Department of Health, which is something which has been really sorely needed. So he's an absolute hero in that respect. So perhaps talking about some of those challenges and being as open as he can be about some of the challenges he's faced in terms of some of the skepticism around diagnosis as well. You would assume that diagnosis was the most obvious thing that should happen, and we've heard from Leah and from Guy about how diagnosis is fundamental to and now empowering people with bipolar to live well. But not everyone shares that view, which is very frustrating. So that's why it's so important that civil society organisations like our own work together to be able to get the stories of lived experience out to as many people as possible, and to basically connect up all of that million or so people who are affected by bipolar, who have had these profound experiences, and they just need to meet and support each other to live well and to find their common solutions. So there you go, Jeremy.
All right.
Presentation. So.
That's brilliant. So thank you very much for answering all those questions. I'm now going to hand you back to Cheryl, who's been monitoring the Q&A box on the computer screen. Thank you.
I certainly have. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to our three speakers. We've kept you very busy, and it's been a very busy time on the Q&A as well. If I can start with Cressida Dickens' question. She's from District 1210. She has actually asked two questions, and one of the latter ones says that she's a psychologist and a journalist and a Rotarian in 1210, and she's very willing to help us, Simon. So it's a marvellous contact for us. Her question is, how can Rotarians support people within the community? What can we do to help?
Well, I think we're producing a pack, aren't we, Cheryl, which is going to be going out in the new year. So, Cressida, there's loads you can do. I mean, having a conversation about bipolar, flying a flag in your local community, and just having some basic knowledge of what bipolar is and some of the symptoms, and be able to talk confidently about what you don't know as well, and be able to forward people on to be able to get support. And providing a safe space for people to have that conversation about it. Many people will probably come up to you that maybe don't have bipolar. That's a good thing, because at least it means that they're aware of the symptoms. So to be able to do that, and then to be able to potentially support and sponsor a bipolar support group in your local area, that'd be absolutely fantastic. It takes a while to set them up. Like, we're not going to promise you can set them up overnight. You need to recruit volunteers, and actually Rotarians can help with that. So when we do have a group set up, we train up people who've got lived experience. So they've got either living with bipolar or got close friends and family with it. But we need people to be able to help, not just facilitate the group, but to be able to market it as well. So we're finding that you get the group up and running, but we want to be able to get more people attending. So being able to help those facilitators put posters up in local supermarkets and GP surgeries, all of that is really, really important, Cressida. So we could do loads together. So get in touch with Cheryl. It sounds like you could be championing bipolar as well within your cluster as well. If you haven't got a cluster champion, you might want to do that. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Simon. I will certainly be in touch. And also from District 1210, the next question in was from Dr. Makandra Chidwara, who says he would like to invite you to their district conference, Rotary District Conference, on the 30th of September 2023. So, Simon, if I forward those details to you, is that okay?
Please do. I'd love to go. If I can't make it, then we'll get one of our colleagues. What part of the country is that? Is that district?
It's 1210, and I'm trying to think geographically off the top of my head, but we'll give you the details.
It doesn't matter. I'm just interested.
We'll zoom in on it.
So
it's somewhere near Wolverhampton.
Wolverhampton. It's a great part of the country, so I'll just love to go there. If I've not got something on that.
Right. It's just also from Dr. Makanda, is how can I set up a district project on living with bipolar?
Well, we could work together on that. So we've got staff in the northwest. We've got a small office in London, but actually most of the staff, like I'm based in Hexham, and we're recruiting more staff who are based out in the regions. I think it was the old-fashioned term, wasn't it? But we run self-management courses, so it could be a matter of linking you up with them, and then to be able to try to get some self-management courses out and publicised in the Wolverhampton area, and then using that to set a group up. So that could be a good way. And it might be, if you've got clinical expertise in bipolar as well, it might be that you might want to help run them as well. That could be something that could reduce the cost potentially. So that'd be fantastic. That's a fantastic offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. From Dipesh Pandra, next. The Bipolar Commission report has a lot of recommendations. What's the timescale for implementing these?
I think it's a 10-year. Realistically, it's a 10-year project, because the NHS isn't there yet in terms of where it needs to be. There's some really good people within the NHS, and we've found lots of excellent doctors who work within the NHS, and all the individual model of care that we've identified that people with bipolar need, like rapid, quick diagnosis, to having a named psychiatrist, to effective self-management courses. All of those exist in pockets within the NHS, so it's not impossible, but certainly the NHS is not in a place to be able to provide that. They provide a network. Their model of care is called episodic care, which is a person with bipolar would have to go to their GP to be able to access a psychiatrist, which kind of works if someone's got maybe a mild condition or what. But for bipolar, if you're starting to have a manic episode, you need to talk to your psychiatrist that day to be able to get them to change your medication. But what happens is you have to wait for a GP, and the GPs are really good. I'm not going to bash GPs at all, because they do an amazing job. But you just have to, you might get a GP appointment that day, but it might take another 3 weeks. And then you've got to get a delay on the secondary care. And in that time, that individual has gone from just needing a small tweak to their medication to suddenly having a full-blown manic episode. That means they have to be hospitalized, and went through the horrendous experiences that Leah had to go through. So the NHS is not in a place yet to kind of fully appreciate that model doesn't really work for the vast majority of people with bipolar. But we can change it. I mean, the point is, there's some really excellent people in the NHS, some amazing doctors, a lot of people that do get that, and we're just trying to bring them together so that we can get a common voice and we can advocate for those changes. And I think in 10 years that is possible, because the young people we're talking to today about training up to be psychiatrists, those are the people that will be delivering this care in 10 years' time. So we can do it. It is possible.
Yep. The next question, Simon, is actually another request about a district conference. Barbara Middleton is saying, could you go to her district conference on the 7th and 8th of October in 2023? I wonder if this is a good opportunity for you to tell everyone about the designated web pages on your Bipolar UK website, where Rotarians can go on, because requests like that could come via there as well, couldn't they? And your dedicated email. So could you sort of tell everybody about that, your website pages and your dedicated email?
That's great, Cheryl. I don't even need to do media training, do I, with your wonderful prompts? So as part of the partnership, we've established a sub-site for Bipolar UK and Rotary, because it's obviously, we want to make it as easy for you as possible to be able to empower people living with bipolar. So we've worked with Cheryl and the team at Rotary to develop a sub-site. So I can put it in the link to it. So if you type in Bipolar UK Rotary, it should come up. I'll just double check for it now. We're live. I'll put it in the chat as well. And this gives you all the basics about what bipolar is, what the partnership is, some resources, how you can volunteer. And it's a great opportunity to get involved. And will be the best place. You
won't be able to probably put it on because of the way the webinar's set up, but it's basically, isn't it? It's but your bipolaruk.org/Rotary will get them in to all the details, and then the dedicated email, is it Rotary@bipolaruk.org?
Rotary@bipolaruk.org, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. You know, because with the way we're structured, we can't really put the chat comments on. So I've just got a couple more questions, if you'll bear with me, because people are still putting them on.
Just stepping in from the background, we will put all the contact information in the description to the YouTube video, and the YouTube video link will be distributed far and wide. So contact information for you, Simon, and the dedicated website and dedicated email address will be added to the description of the YouTube video. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. We've even got our own technical backup expert who's absolutely fabulous. Just finally then, a couple of questions. Joe Portway says, what steps are you taking to recognise early symptoms in young people?
So we've just done a campaign called Could It Be Bipolar? So we did a lot of promotion on Facebook, though those of you who are kind of familiar with social media will appreciate that young people don't use Facebook, unfortunately. So we'll probably need to adapt that to TikTok or something like that. But we're doing a lot of work within the NHS, building up our networks there. So we're talking to all of the, we just recruited a new trustee who's a child psychiatrist as well, Dr. Adi Sharma, who's one of the national leads on bipolar amongst young people and children. So he'll be our lesson bipolar. So he'll be helping drive forward the work of the charity. We'll love to do stuff in schools. So we do training and awareness raising. So if anyone's got any connections to schools or universities, then do reach out to us. We've done some effective stuff at a number of universities. So that'd be fantastic. We've also got an e-learning package that we developed with our corporate partners at Access Group. That's a really nice way of introducing bipolar. So you should have, all Rotarians, I think, were invited to do it. We can't invite you enough to do it. It's only 15 minutes, gives you the basics. But if you have any connections within any schools or universities, then do let us know, and we can forward that on to them, and that can be a really good first step to people kind of getting some basic awareness of what bipolar is and within their individual organisations.
Thank you so much. Just a final comment, and you actually picked up on it, Simon. Eve Conway put a lovely comment in about please to mention about the Lonely this Christmas. And what I've done, I've put it as the lead article in our humanitarian service newsletter, so that everybody, all our Rotarians, will be able to pick up on it. But did you want to say anything finally about the Lonely this Christmas?
Yeah, we're providing, we provide support groups, but we also do peer callback service and an e-community. So we provide support over Christmas. So we've increased our support over Christmas so that people have that connection. A lot of people with bipolar have got amazing families, very supportive, but a lot of people don't. I mean, sadly, because of the condition, a lot of people end up being single and living alone. So we wanted to provide a service that would allow people to be able to call up, to be able to speak to someone else with lived experience. So that's why we did the appeal, and why we're so honoured to be able to have Nikki Chin. So we managed to lobby Universal Music to allow us to use, I think, is it the first minute or 30 seconds of Lonely at Christmas? I can't remember anything beyond that. So I think it just to kind of to raise awareness of bipolar and to raise money for those services. So do have a listen to it. If it moves you, if you think, oh, that's just, and it helps you connect to the condition, because it is about bipolar and someone's personal journey with it, then if you think your Rotary, your local Rotary, be interested in making us one of your Christmas charities, and do sign up to it, and it'd be fantastic to be able to help us provide more services for people because of it.
It's absolutely marvellous. It's my pleasure now, actually, to thank you all. Simon, Leah, Guy, you've been fantastic this evening, sharing with us all your thoughts and experience and answering so many questions. And thank you very much for your fantastic work that you're doing to help others. So on behalf of us all this evening, had a fantastic night. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Cheryl. It's been a real honour. And thanks, Michael, and thank you, Phil, for organising this, and Guy and Leah, of course, for being amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
If I can now give you the information for the next session, which we hope you will join us on January the 11th. the area of focus is the protecting the environment. And we are so fortunate to have as our speaker, Deputy Hilary Jearn, who is actually from Jersey, and she's the Minister in charge of energy and climate change. She attended COP27 recently and is passionate about the initiative to reduce carbon emissions and to protect our environment. So we do hope you will join us on January the 11th and bring along your friends. Use the recording with your clubs, because the InFocus sessions, I hope you'll agree, are just such a good start for Rotary in action. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. Come again on January the 11th.